our dear viewers, welcome to yet another episode of Decent Conversations, where we are all about having lives that work. I'm your girl Tabitha Mwai, and today our topic of conversation is on children and sexual offenses. And today with me is a beautiful panel who is well conversant on the subject of sexual offenses, and they'll be shedding more light so that we understand these issues that affect our children. And I will wish for them to introduce themselves, starting with my farthest left.
Hello everyone, my name is Mary Liz Biuba, a human rights activist, a black queer intersectional feminist working categorically on issues to do with women, children and the LGBTIQ rights.
Thank you.
Hello viewers, I am Melda Precious. I am a gender consultant and officer. I work with regards to children's rights, and especially when it comes to looking at their sexual offenses, mental health, and when it comes to countering violent extremism.
Oh, thank you. And we also have Salome Njeri, who is going to be our sign language interpreter. So without much further ado, I would like to just go directly into the topic and start with the question of what are sexual offenses and what are these offenses that affect children. Let's start with you, Mary Liz.
I'll be using a document that is the Sexual Offences Act number 3 of 2016 that was revised in 2014, and it is very fundamental when we're speaking about this, because then when it comes to a situation where there is a scenario of a sexual offense, then this is what is going to be used to take you to court. This is the document that the guidelines that are offered here on the Sexual Offences Act, together with the fact that we are talking about children, we have a Children's Act of number 8 of 2001 of the laws of Kenya. These are the two documents that are going to jail you or render you free, because all that is said here is what is going to be used in court. And that is very important. And before I say some of the sexual offenses that are known, there are some terms that we need to be able to define clearly and be able to know when it comes to especially children. First of all, who is a child? A child has the meaning assigned thereto in the Children Act, that is Cap 141, and the Cap 141 here then goes ahead to say child means any human being under the age of 18 years. So anyone who is below 18 years is a child. So this act speaks of the cap that quotes it, and this is constitutional. It says what it says. And then we have complainant, means the republic or the alleged victim, the person who has reported the case as being the one who has been victimized. And then we have things like consent, where it has the meaning assigned to it under this act. And when you look here, the term consent, sorry, I'll have to go back and forth within these books because we can only refer to these terms according to how they are referred to here.
So as to get the right definition.
So that you don't end up, our consent is related to the definition of a child, where, as we have said, a child is anyone who is below the age of 18, and consent is being able to consent to anything sexual, be it touch, be it penetrative, be it like whatever it is that is outside, inside the confines of something sexual, then someone has to be able to consent. And consent can only be offered in terms of a person being mentally stable, in terms of a person being very sober and not intoxicated. And by sober here, I mean even if you've just taken one shot of alcohol for a child, or of tequila or something, and the child now is rendered incapable of offering consent by the fact that they're a child first, and by the fact that they're intoxicated. And all these confines that would the only way a person is supposed to give consent is if they're above 18, and if they're not intoxicated, or they don't have a mental problem, or they're not being influenced by whatever thing that you've done to them to be able to influence them. And that is very important. Another thing that we might be able to look at is genital organs, includes the whole or part of male or female genital organs, and for purposes of this act includes the anus, which most of the time people think it's not a genital organ. It is. And then we have gang rape, where it's speaking about many people subjecting someone to unconsented sexual act. And then we have HIV, which we all it's about HIV virus and how it's transmitted and how you should be able to understand, because then when a child is being put under that circumstance, that is one of the things that they could possibly face. Then we have indecent act, which means an unlawful intention act which causes any contact between any part of the body of a person with the genital organs, breasts, or buttocks of another, but does not include an act that causes penetration. So when it causes penetration, it becomes now rape, defilement, pedophilia, and all that kind of stuff. But before it becomes that, it doesn't mean it's not harassment. It means it's an indecent act, and you can also be taken to court for that. B, by exposure. Indecent act can be by exposure or display of any pornographic material to any person against his or her will. So you see those people who always DM you on Facebook Messenger, and they send you pictures of their, dicks and pictures of two people having sex and everything. That in itself is already a violation. If you can zero in on those people, you can take them to court and they'll be jailed for that, because it's wrong, because you didn't consent to that. And then another thing, for the purpose of the conversation that we are having, those are some of the most important terminologies that we are going to interact with, and to highlight some of the acts which cause penetration or indecent acts committed within the view of especially children, which is what we are talking about. Then the first one we are going to speak about here today is defilement, where a person who commits an act which causes penetration with a child is guilty of an offense called defilement. A person who commits an offense of defilement with a child aged 11 years or less shall upon conviction be sentenced to imprisonment for life. And I was telling someone here this conversation yesterday, and they thought I was being ridiculous, but it says categorically, for as long as there was penetration and it's a child below 18 years, that's the sentence. That's the highest you can get. And then the third one says, a person who commits an offense of defilement with a child between the age of 12 and 15 years is liable upon conviction to imprisonment for a term of not less than 20 years. And a person who commits an offense of defilement with a child between the age of 16 and 18 years is liable upon conviction to imprisonment for a term of not less than 15 years. So the harshest you can get is 15 years, I guess. I mean, the less harshest one is 15 years up to life imprisonment. And then we have, it is a defense to a charge under this section if it is proved that such child deceived the accused person into believing that he or she was over the age of 18 years at the time of the alleged commission of the offense, and the accused reasonably believed that the child was over the age of 18. So it's very fundamental, and I always say, ask the age of the child. While you have a responsibility to know the age of the child has a responsibility to be honest about the age. Because if they lied about the age, and you first of all, you didn't go an extra mile to prove that that was their real age, you have a case to answer for that. And if because they lied, they also have a case to answer, because then that means they operated against the laws. So the laws apply to everyone, whether you are underage. While it protects you a lot, it also cautions you against lying against the law. Another thing is that the belief referred to in this subsection 5b is to be determined having to regard all the circumstances, including any steps the accused person took to ascertain the age of the complaint. You can ask, if you are told and you don't believe, ask for the ID. If you don't get the ID, ask for whatever documents that is an official document that will verify the age of this child. Another one that I'll address, the second one, is attempted defilement. A person who attempts to commit an act which would cause penetration with a child is guilty of an offense termed attempted defilement. A person who commits an offense of attempted defilement with a child is liable upon conviction to imprisonment for a term of not less than 10 years. The provisions of this section 8.5, 8.6, and 8.7, and 8.8 shall apply mutatis mutandis to this section. Those are terminologies for the courts. I'll not even attempt to explain anything there, but basically up to 10 years for just attempting, because then when it comes to consent, you're supposed to understand a child cannot consent. And the fact that you attempted to do something like that, because it becomes an attempt if you are just about to begin defiling a child and then someone found you and then you ran away. That becomes an attempt, and it's still a crime. Why should it be charged? It should be charged because suppose someone didn't find you, what would have happened? So it's about punishing the intention to want to defile a child. And then the last one that I'll address is indecent act with a child. Any person who commits an indecent act with a child is guilty of the offense of committing an indecent act with a child. That's the name of it. and is liable upon conviction to imprisonment for a term of not less than 10 years. So this is another 10 years for yourself. It is a defense to charge under subsection 1 if it is proved that such child deceived the accused person to believing that such child was over the edge. Again, we are looking at how flexible the law is. Well, the law is saying it's wrong to defile a child or to attempt to defile a child or to involve yourself in an indecent act with a child. It is very aware that we have people who are manipulating the situation. And so the law is trying to cater for that, so that in as much as you are lured into that, it has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt that that's what happened, so that you don't end up being convicted for 10 years and maybe you didn't do anything wrong. And then that was the third one. I'll let my colleague be able to address that.
Maybe before she takes on, I would want you to expound more on indecent acts, because most of the time when we talk of defilement, when we talk of sexual offences, indecent acts are not really given much light.
Yeah.
And we really assume, I don't think we assume, but I think we lack knowledge on indecent acts. So probably before she talks about the other offences, you could like give more elaboration on what indecent acts amount to.
And sadly, indecent acts are very prevalent in Kenya. It's simple things like when you're walking in town, for instance, and we know how rowdy our town is, especially when you're going to your stage to come at home. And there's always this makanga who is busy telling you, Madam Twende, touching you unnecessarily. That could easily qualify for indecent act, both for children and for an adult, because where we were reading, there's a part where it says indecent act with an adult, where they've not consented to touch and you're touching them. In Nairobi, we have one of the most elaborate system. If you stay in Kawangware, you can take matatu number 2. We all know where matatu number 2s are taken, at railways. We all know where you can find them. Why is it necessary for someone to come and touch you unnecessarily? For what reason? You know, all those kinds of things. Another thing, we've had incidences where you're in a matatu and someone sits near you, and before you know it, and I'm sorry, but women go through this a lot, but how many people know they can report that? You can't report. If you see something like that happening, you want the person, if they don't stop, take initiative. And I know it's really sad that our laws would demand things like, where is the evidence that the guy did that? And so be proactive, be the kind of person, if you see something fishy that is happening, take out your phone, record it. If it's a conversation that you feel it's intruding and everything, take your and record it, so that when you're going, you have evidence to be able to report that. Now they happen even double or triple to children, where a child is being touched in a private part. That is indecent act, and most of the time children would not speak about that. It happens in family settings where you're in a family meeting or a family get together or something, and a thing like that, when it happens in an environment where we've trained our children that they should respect adults, that their uncles and aunties are always right, that when they're touched in a certain way, if it's an uncle, it's okay and everything. And so a child cannot speak about that. But when they speak, there are implications that are covered in the Sexual Offences Act and also covered in the Constitution and the children's laws. Yeah.
Well, I like that you've mentioned most of these things are happening at home, but we'll get back to that conversation. Probably let's first expound on the other kinds of sexual offences affecting children.
So to add on what she has said, there is also a common offence affecting children, which is child pornography. And child pornography, as per the Constitution, you can say that it is any image, picture or video or film that is shared of a child that it's not required, something that we can consider an indecent act. And some of the common ones that we have are like people sharing images and even videos of children while they are naked. And do you know that even sharing an image or a film while birthing a child is an offense? It's a sexual offense act for you to birth your child, then share your image. Even sharing an image of your child in a bikini, it's a sexual offense act, because this kid has no right for you to share their image while they're naked in the social media, or be it in any form where you want to share it. Again, we have child trafficking, which is, it's coming in Kenya. It has not been there for some time, but now it's like it's coming in and it's on the rise. And how do you identify child trafficking, and what is even child trafficking? Child trafficking is when you remove a child from their safety places and take them to other places where you want them to commit any sexual offense. And child trafficking can be done by any person. It can be a relative, it can be a teacher or anyone close to the child. And it's so easy to identify child trafficking when it is happening. And one of the ways of identifying a child that is being transported or when child trafficking is happening, you realize that the child is not comfortable with this person. Most of the time when a child is with someone and is comfortable with the person, you will realize that this kid has some kind of freedom and everything. But when you realize that the kid is not in any freedom, it means that there is something going on between this child and this adult. And again, it is so difficult to identify a case of child trafficking. Why is it difficult? Because people who do this, they always make this kid look kind of comfortable, they dress them well. But anytime you realize something that highlights that this kid is not comfortable, always make sure you report. And another thing, the kid can be comfortable, can be dressed comfortably, but this person will hinder this kid from talking or communicating to people. Once you realize that you are in a vehicle or anywhere, and a kid is with an adult, and this adult is limiting this kid's conversation, you have to investigate, because it means that this kid might be undergoing something that is not right for them. Yeah.
Probably you can mention something on child prostitution, because we've seen, especially in the coastal areas, some young girls are forced to leave school. Some of them are sold by their parents. So probably you can elaborate on what child prostitution entails.
Okay. So child prostitution is when kids are forced to engage in an act for the sake of either benefiting another person. You can force a child to engage in prostitution for your own gain, maybe for pornography purposes, or kids engage in prostitution so as to get income to feed their families. So child prostitution mostly happen in coastal areas, Mtwapa, Mombasa, and in the beaches area. And child prostitution happens because these kids have been made to believe that if I do this, there's this kind of income that I'm going to get. So it's more of child tourism, sex tourism, that is, if I put it in the simplest way possible. And child prostitution happens because as the society, or even as parents, or we who are close to these children, we don't take the mandate of keeping these kids in school, whereas there are a lot of feeding programs in school, and there is also free education. People don't take advantage of that. They only want to gain from the kids, and especially now that they are the mzungus that are going to provide for these kids. So you find that even parents encourage their kids to get into child prostitution so as to earn income for their families. And as per the Constitution, just as Liz had highlighted, it is punishable by the Constitution, and any act of prostitution from underage, from 11 and below, it's life imprisonment, 11 to 12, they all apply in the same way. It doesn't matter whether it is prostitution, trafficking, or any form of indecent act.
Oh, okay. So because this is something that is rampant in the coastal areas, is it also associated to beach boys? Because you see, when you go to Mombasa, you'll find a lot of young boys in the beach. You know, some of them are there at will. Some of them probably have been sent by their parents. What will you say about that?
So I'll say, yes, it's more associated to the beach boys. And when you look at the beach boys, some are underage, while some are over the age of 18. So child prostitution may be associated with them because these beach boys, they work to earn income, right? So even these kids want to be associated to these boys. But again, remember, there is also a Sexual Offence Act for kids who are under the age of 18. Now that again comes in when there is this beach boy who is under the age of 18 and there is this girl who is under the age of 18 now. Now, there is also that aspect that comes in, and there is also implications for that. Maybe I'll ask her to check into the Constitution what can be done so that we can get the direct statistics or the direct facts of what happens for child acts or under the age of 18.
When we look at child sex tourism, and this involves both in the country and outside, because then part of sex tourism would involve someone coming into the country, paying air ticket for a child to leave the country for the sex of, exploiting them sexually. And it says here, a person including a juristic person who makes or organizes any travel arrangement for or on behalf of any other person, whether that other person is resident within or outside the borders of Kenya, with the intention of facilitating the commission of any sexual offense against a child, irrespective of whether that offense is committed, or prints or publishes in any manner any information that is intended to promote or facilitate conduct that would constitute sexual offenses offense against a child introduces or organizes or facilitates contact with another person under the auspices of promoting tourism in any manner in order to promote conduct that would constitute a sexual offense against a child is guilty of an offense of promoting child sex tourism and is liable upon conviction to the imprisonment for a term of not less than 10 years, and where the accused person is a juristic person, to a fine of not less than 2 million shillings. So if you don't come from Kenya, 2 million shillings. And of course, I believe when it comes to laws, you'll get charged here 2 million, and then you'll probably in your country also you'll be put, like in the US they put people under the database for sex offenders and all that kind of stuff, so that, you know. And then when it comes to child prostitution, any person who knowingly permits any child to remain in any premises for the purposes of causing such child to be sexually abused or to participate in any form of sexual activity or in any obscene or indecent exhibition or show, acts as a procurer of a child for the purposes of sexual intercourse or for any form of sexual abuse or indecent exhibition or show, includes, these are like in parts before we get to what they'll be charged for, induces a person to be a client of a child for sexual intercourse or for any form of sexual abuse or indecent exhibition or show by means of print or other media, oral advertisements, or other similar means. The fourth one is takes advantage of his influence over or his relationship to a child to procure the child for sexual intercourse or any form of sexual abuse or indecent exhibition or show, threatens or uses violence towards a child to procure the child for sexual intercourse or any other form of sexual abuse or indecent exhibition or show, intentionally or knowingly owns, leases, rents, manages, occupies, or has control of any movable, immovable, or immovable property used for purposes of the commission of any offense under this act with a child by any person, gives monetary consideration, goods, other benefits, or any other form of inducement to a child or his parents with the intent to procure the child for sexual intercourse or any form of sexual abuse or indecent exhibition or show, commits the offense of benefiting from child prostitution and is liable upon conviction to imprisonment for term of not less than 10 years. And so this covers everyone, even a person who comes into a home, the child is not even aware, but two adults consent by giving each other money or any kind of transaction, or if it's a person who is, you might even not even know what is happening, because at the end of the day, we are acknowledging that a child cannot make a decision. And so everyone who took part in decision making to making this child become a victim of child trafficking or child sex tourism is then liable to 10 years imprisonment.
We'll pick it from that, but I will want us to take a short break, then we'll be right back. So welcome back. If you just joined us, this is Decent Conversations, and we are talking about children and sexual offenses. So we were talking about the kinds of offenses that affect children. But now there are quite many, and you've elaborated quite well on these different offenses and even mentioned some of the implications in case you're taken to court. But I would want to know, apart from now the sentences and all that, we are looking at children who are affected by the sexual offenses, who are the victims in these cases. How are they affected by the sexual offenses?
Children are affected in so many ways. Remember, as a child, that's when you're beginning to develop a lot of things, psychologically, emotionally, physically, and otherwise. So there's no measure into how a child gets affected, because the effects are very, very severe. Because first of all, and we've had so many cases that we've seen on our news platforms and all that kind of stuff, where a child has been defiled for a period of 4 or 5 years, and the child ended up not being able to talk again, because it was a moment of their innocence being taken away, and they didn't know how to defend themselves, and from there on out they couldn't be able to talk. And these are some of the things that happen to children day by day when these things happen to children. One of the major things would be then mentally being affected, where children grow up and mentality is affected in different ways, where even things like esteem are affected. It's not because a child has been made by their peers to feel like they have a low self-esteem. It's how they've gone through these kinds of defilement, the kinds of abuses, the kinds of sexual offensive acts that have been perpetrated against them, that they're not confident in themselves. First of all, a perpetrator would always ensure to make the victim feel like it's their fault, and so they're living their life thinking they're the ones who are at fault. What did they do? In an environment where they're growing up in a school where, for instance, there are children who have not experienced that, and how they share their relationships at home. And remember, the one thing that we need to highlight is that most of the time, especially for children, their abuser is someone they know really well, someone they stay with at home, someone who is their neighbor, someone who they've had, sometimes it's even a confrontational situation that happened between one child and the other that renders a child a victim to an adult who finds it a way of revenge. But most of the time, it's a person that is known to this child really well. And so if nothing has been done towards what happened to this child, remember, this child is continuing to stay in an environment that was abusive by seeing the person who abused them, because mostly it happens at home, by being in a place where the abuse happened through and through. And when we incorporate things like poverty and all that kind of stuff, this child is stuck in that life for all their life until they're grown up. The effects are immeasurable. The effects, that's when we end up, while prostitution as a career, someone can choose to be that, we have children who have ended up being prostitutes because they do not know any other option, because they're exposed to that. And then the saddest thing is that even at that, you realize some are even exposed to that by their parents, by their family members, where a mother, for instance, does some sort of a business where men come a lot, and there's transactional sex that is happening between these adults and maybe the mother or anyone who is older, but it spills over to the child being defiled and parents not being able to say anything. Another way in which they're affected is in terms of, how they develop physically. We have a lot of children who have ended up living with some sort of disabilities, including getting things like stroke because of being damaged because of defilement. A child is raped beyond repair, that it becomes impossible for this child to heal from the damages, and that affects how they look physically. And most of the time, while sometimes we hear stories, weird stories of being told the child was okay and then something ABCD happened. If you interrogate the situation very closely, sometimes you'll be shocked that this child was going through some sort of defilement the whole time and no one knew anything about it. Another way in which these children are affected is how they relate socially. So for them, how they create relationships with people becomes a very deprived way of doing so, in terms of they end up even constantly wanting to create relationships with people who are potentially their other abusers, because then they have been exposed so much to being abused that they do not know any alternative. They don't even know how it feels to be in some sort of a relationship or a friendship or a social setting with a person who is not an abuser, because that's all they've known. And so that affects them, that spills over to affecting how they formulate their romantic relationships when they grow up. And that's why we have, the effects are very immense. They affect them in terms of education, where in school they can't be able to participate fully in education and all that it entails. There are very many. I'd love my colleague to be able to highlight some of those as well.
Because I would also want her to mention something on, there's a saying that says an abuser is someone who has been abused is a potential abuser, because of that pain, that bitterness, and as you've said, that's how they construct their way of intimacy. So as you mentioned some of the other effects, probably you can highlight something on that.
So it says someone who is abused is a potential abuser, that if that person does not heal from the process, and healing is the most crucial element in this aspect. When a child is being abused, then the child is likely to isolate themselves, like will isolate from any activities, whether it is curriculum activities, any activities at home. We'll always find this kid ako tu peke yake, he doesn't like anything. Like if you find the kid will just do that thing and then go to other things. So you find that in this lonely time when this kid is isolated from other activities or from other people, it is easier for this kid to be abused. Also, this kid becomes vulnerable even to the abusers themselves because of the way they present themselves. Like you said, they have no self-esteem and they take abuse as something normal. Like to them, it's nothing. Like it should be happening this way. So you find that they also, when they're developing maybe into teenage and later maybe into their other stages, it's easier. Hata ukimshika tu hivi, he knows that it is only sex that you need. And even with the provocation of a text like, hi dear, hi so, the kid thinks that the thing that you need is only sex. So it becomes more easier for the prey to abuse these kids. And again, another effect that we can highlight that can affect this kid is stress, and stress can go up to traumatic stress. And you know, post-traumatic stress can affect someone for years. You can even grow for over 20 years, you still have post-traumatic stress within you because of the things that happened to you when you are a kid. And so how do we deal with these kind of things at home as parents, or even if you're not a parent, you're a guardian, you have a sibling, or even just like a good Samaritan at home, and you want to help this kid. When you realize that a kid, maybe you ameenda PE shule and you are a teacher, and this kid hata hawezi kaa karibu na mtoto mwenzake, like a boy, so like you're supposed to investigate. Mbona umtoi, like it's that simple. Mbona umtoi hawezi kaa karibu na boy? Why is it that this kid is trying to like separate himself? There's an aspect of fear. So you can call this kid and ask her or him, nini will happen, why don't you like these people, and get to learn about their fears, why they maybe waliona tu kwa TV, and most of the time you will find that this kid was defiled, and that is why he or she can't even stand close to the opposite sex. So that is one of the easiest way to know when you're at home. Number 2 is the conversation. Like a kid can just joke and say, mami unajua anko so ako na tabia mbaya, unajua nani ako hivi. So you have to dig deep and know what is tabia mbaya, how do you view tabia mbaya, because that is where it starts from the simple things we do at home. Or maybe you have like a house help or someone who is helping you in the house, and when he or she is bathing this kid, there is a way that he's touching this kid in a provocative way. So this one promotes any kind of sexual offenses that we have mentioned. So we should always be keen to learn and know from these kids from their own perspective.
I think I like that you've highlighted the fact that you'll see fear in a child, you will see isolation, you know, even change in behavior. Probably you can add and help us identify. So if I'm with this kid as a teacher or in the home environment, what are the other signs that I can see that probably a child has been abused? Liz, you can add on.
And I always say, let's allow kids to have a voice. Let's learn to listen to what kids are saying. And that is very important, because when you allow that, you'd be able to identify gaps like parent-children relationship. Most of the time, when a child goes through an incident of defilement, the one thing that is hurt the most is the parent-child relationship. Because when a child, for instance, a child tries to speak to you and you don't pay attention, that will be the end of that. Regardless of how many times it will happen again, this child will never speak about it. Because with children, the children are in a developing stage. Anything you tell them, they adapt it, they learn through it. And so the lesson that you taught that child there is that these things happen and they can happen. You don't have to say anything, it's fine. And so they'll not talk about it. They'll only come to learn at a later age that this was actually abuse. And so for me, like, the most important thing, give children a voice. That way you are able to build a relationship between yourself as a parent and that child. Now, whenever something happens, you'll be the first person to know, because most of the time, kids are as innocent as they come. They'll say many things from a very joking perspective. It's you who is supposed to be able to read between the lines and listen when you hear a kid saying just randomly, mami unajua auntie ako na tabia mbaya sana. interrogate what that looks like, because then huge cases of how young boys were introduced into sex is because their house helps were the first people who introduced them into sex. How did they do that if it wasn't defilement, given the house help was an adult who's 18 years and above? So those are some of the things we need to interrogate. Akisema auntie, don't just assume they're talking about auntie and the boyfriend out there. Interrogate it further. How personal is it? Because then a kid sees the mom and the dad in the house all the time, right? Do they say the mom and the dad are tabia mbaya? They do not. Why did they say the auntie has tabia mbaya? It's not because there's a boyfriend out there and that thing is not affecting. When something is not affecting a kid has no business with it. Like, it's as simple as that. But immediately they begin to feel affected, they begin to speak about it. And it's not a sad thing, it's a beautiful thing that a kid will always speak about something from a perspective of, I'm just saying it in a very passive way. It's happening and that's it. It's our duty as adults, as grown-ups, as well-wishers, as good Samaritans, as authority holders, as all these people who are sitting in position of authority, to be able to read between the lines and be able to understand what is the kid saying, then listen. And when it comes to how that affects then their relationships in future, when you don't listen and identify these gaps, is when your child grows up to have PTSD, as she addressed, amongst many other disorders that will manifest in a way of mental health in future, manifest in a way that where they become an abuser. And I know most of the time we try to say, but they were abused, that's why they're doing it, but that's not a justification. It's a proof that the society has failed to identify when our kids are going through what they're going through, and we don't see it to address it when it happens.
I like that you're bringing the fact that we need to give the children a voice, and we also need to listen. You know, they could have a voice, but we are not listening. And with recent conversations, that's a big gap that we have. We are not listening as parents, as older siblings. We are busy with life. So probably you could give us some recommendations. How do we deal with these cases if it's happening at home, and how do we listen? Because yes, they might speak, but where are we to listen? Yeah.
Before she add on the recommendation, I also like to focus on the act of art and play. And when we are talking of art, we talk of this kid who loves drawing, and actually when the kids are below the age of 5 or under the age of 10, you will find them drawing on the walls and the likes. So when you see a kid draw on the wall, we always just assume anapenda tu kuchora kwa ukuta. Do you even take time kumuuliza hii ni nini umechora? So if hii ni nini umechora, the kid will tell you huyu ni auntie akinyoosha anafanyanga hivi na hivi. Atachora kitu and then kuna some kamaji hapo nini, maybe kuna ken. So those are the simplest way. Even when they play, always try to be alert. Like when your kids are playing, what kind of stories are they telling each other? Nawambia nini? Ama ako tu na dolls wake, like you've bought your kids a lot of dolls, ako nazo kwa nyumba, and then the kids is just playing with the dolls and anaziongelesha, mchape, mfanye hivi, do like this. It's so easier to know in that perspective. Ama ako na gari, like those are things that we ignore, but it's so easier to learn from such like things.
Or even when a child is in school and they've been told to write about the memorable day in their life. But how will you be able to know they were trying to send a message, even if you don't even bother if your child, what composition or insha they wrote? All you're bent on seeing is, ulikuwa namba ngapi? You don't even want to know what they wrote in their composition. And sometimes that kid could be performing badly because there's this one composition they wrote that the teacher read and called them and punished them, because then the society is so against kids speaking about anything sexual, and punished them thinking they did something wrong. The kid won't come home and say I did something wrong and I was punished. The kid will hold it in. How many times when your child is telling you nafanya midterm, do you tell them ukipatiwa karatasi zako niletee home zote nione, so that you can be able to see, read, go through? Even if they're writing things you can't understand, ask them what did you mean here, so that you can be able to understand, because kids are always hungry to communicate. And so when it comes to recommendation, I'll say for a fact, give children a platform to feel like they can speak. That's one. Make them comfortable with speaking. Anything, even if it's about telling the most amazing experience, and we can build these cultures around how we've socially built ourselves. For instance, in a family setting, how often do you sit as a family to have dinner together? Because it's in a setting like that that they can be able to sit and say, so everyone tell me about your day. And you'll be surprised that when you tell your kids to tell you about their day, there might not be much that happened in school, but there's something that happened when they were in the bus coming back home. And that would be something that was the highlight of their day, and they'll tell you about it. And that way you'll be able to know and identify if there's an abuser somewhere, where are they? And then when your kids speak, listen. Listen is a gift from I don't know where. You need to work on knowing how to listen. Do not listen to answer. Do not listen to tell your kid, I'm proud of you. Do not listen to tell your kids, congratulations. Just listen. Hear the things they said. And then you remember to remind them all the time. Kesho kikuja, the same thing. Always tell me how your day was. Create a culture that this kid knows a place where they can always speak about what they feel, what they've experienced, and all that kind of stuff. That way, when they can always tell you these things, you can be able to know when there's a difference. And in knowing the difference, you can know how to address it. That's one. Two, let's, as adults, understand these acts. This is very important. And I always say, because then, most of the time, we do these things thinking, the kid told me she's 18 years old. You didn't do your part. When the kid said they're 18, what did you do about it? That I said I'm 18 doesn't mean I'm 18. We are growing up in a society where a girl is being told a girl should not reveal her age. You know, apparently she's not supposed to speak about her age. So if she's gonna be bold enough to speak about her age, you should be able to interrogate that and say, she told me she's 18, is this true? Because I know girls do not speak about their ages. So be conscious enough to identify that and interrogate that, so that by the time you're doing anything with that person, you know for sure they're not a child. That is very important, because then with these acts, the reason they are here is because offenders are out there. And I promise you, when there's a whole Children's Act, and a whole Sexual Offences Act that half of it is about children, it means offending is happening out there, and it's not because it's happening between children and children, it's because it's happening between a child and a grown-up. 10 years is not such a small time. And many times we'll say, these people will deserve to be given a shorter time so that they can come back and fend for their families. No, we are living in a society where women and men are being brought up to value equality, and that said, anyone can fend for the family. So if you get a life imprisonment, you're gonna go for the life imprisonment, because we need to begin to respect, appreciate, and listen and hear kids when they talk and they have things to say, because that is very important. And when they talk, we listen. And when we talk, we should create an environment where they can listen by learning on how we do the listening ourselves as grown-ups.
These documents are public documents.
Yes, they are.
And you can find them online?
Yes, you can find them online. Organizations that you're affiliated with, like these were printed by Action Aid, both of them, and both of them are free copies. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to be a special person. You can just walk. Their offices is at Desmond Tutu building in Westlands. Just walk in and say, my name is so-and-so, and I had you people publish documents when it comes to legal things and all that kind of stuff. I've come for the Children's Offences Act, or I've come for the Sex Offences Act, or for the Children's Law, or for the Constitution. They'll give you documents, because for them, what they do is very important, that they do it on a perspective of legal avenues. And if it's legal avenues, then these are the documents that you need to read. And the Constitution has all this. But you see, the Constitution is written in a jargon, in a language that not many people can break down. Now imagine a whole chapter in the Constitution that speaks about children becomes all this document. Yeah, so this has been elaborated, has been broken down, and it's easy for you to understand. Same as Sexual Offences Act, which most of the things that come here come on the Bill of Rights, they come on different articles, but here it has been put together for your understanding, so that you can use this to refer to the Constitution and how that works.
Imelda, probably you can give your remarks as well.
Okay, so just as we have talked, know that culture is all that brings these things. Yeah. So the first thing that you have to do, let's deal with our stereotypes and myths that we have. It's because of the stereotypes that we as adults, I'll read all the Children's Act and everything, but I'll feel like I can't talk to my kid in this way. Why? Because my stereotype or my myth is holding me back from talking to my kid or telling other kids that this is what is required of you. So as individuals, as a country, let us always deal with our culture, our stereotype, and let us question our myths and stereotypes. Like if you are told, si vizuri kuambia mtoto vitu kama hizo kama ako 4 years, question yourself, mbona si vizuri, and what are even the disadvantages of not telling these kids such stuff at such a young age. So I'll leave us with, let's always question our biases and the stereotypes and the myths that we have. By doing this, we'll be creating a safer space for our kids and even as adults. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this conversation is quite elaborate, and when we talk about children and the sexual offences, it's about time we get knowledge. Knowledge is everything. Let's not wait for other people to get knowledge on our behalf. Kids are being hurt. They have been hurt for years, and we've been quiet about it. And even as we still have the act, there are people, perpetrators who are walking free. So let's get the knowledge first and act. Be watchful. Listen to your children. Give them space to talk, and let's protect our children, because if you don't protect them, who will?
Before we close, and you can always report any case of child trafficking, child violence to Child Helpline, which is 116, or also again you can report to the nearest police station or even the children offices. Most of our children offices are located at the deceased place. When you get to the deceased place, just ask where is the children's office and you'll be directed there. Yeah.
I think that's important. And even the 116 number, it's toll free. You can call it at any time. So if you're scared and you feel like your life is in danger, you can just call 116. Yeah. So once again, let me just thank you all for coming, for making time, and really appreciate your contribution. Thank you, Mary-Liz.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Imelda. Thank you, Salome. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you, our dear viewers. The conversation does not end here. We want to hear from you. So talk to us on Facebook, talk to us on Instagram, talk to us on Twitter. We are at Decent Conversations, and we'll want to hear your feedback and comments. This has been Decent Conversations, and I have been your girl, Tabitha Mwai. Have a good night. Bye-bye.